I've been doing filmmaking and photography for about 2 years now consistently, and I didn't spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on film classes or film courses and spend all my time just doing that. I learned all of this on my own and on YouTube, and so I wanted to give back and do an entire filmmaking course in 5 minutes. So this is all the basics, all you need to know to get started in filmmaking in 5 minutes. So, let's go. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Arrow Vlogs. If you don't know me, my name is Caleb and I'm a young filmmaker and photographer. So if you're new here, maybe consider subscribing. But anyways, let's just jump right into the video. So before you start filmmaking, you obviously need a camera and you need to know your way around a camera. It doesn't really matter what type of camera you have, whether it's a super high-end or a super budget low-end camera, you still need to know settings and the way around your camera. For instance, you need to know what aperture and ISO and shutter speed does to your image. So basically, here's the basics. Aperture will give you that blurry background. So the lower the number of the aperture is, the blurrier your background will be. Typically, you want a lower number because it'll be better in low light, and it'll give you that blurry background, which a lot of people really like. ISO basically gives your image exposure digitally, so it'll add grain the higher you go. So it is nice in low light conditions, but I would recommend with most consumer cameras, don't go over 800 or 1000 ISO, and you should get the cleanest image possible. So basically, for shutter speed, it'll change how much motion blur you have. Typically, you want to double your frame rate, so for filmmaking, you probably want your frame rate at 24 frames per second. So I'd recommend going for 1/50th of a second for your shutter speed. That will give you the most natural motion blur, and it'll be similar to what our eyes see. So now that you have your settings dialed in, let's move on to the second thing you need to know. One of the most important things in filmmaking is your composition, and the easiest way to get good composition is by using the rule of thirds. Basically, on your camera, you should be able to turn it on, and it just looks like a grid. This will give you a super accurate way of lining up your shot and giving you a good composition. Typically, you want your subject eyes on the upper line, and usually in one of the thirds, which would be over here or like over here. So something like that should be pretty good, and make sure if they're on this side of the third that they're looking that way, or if on this side, they're looking that way. If they're on this side of the third and they're looking that way, it feels uncomfortable, and really the composition just doesn't feel right. An easy way to see how this plays out is to go and watch a movie. Basically, you'll see a lot of times when they're talking to someone, they'll be looking that way, and they'll be on this third or something, and they'll just be talking and having a conversation. And it feels the most natural, and that's really what you want to do in filmmaking. Make it feel natural. Another really important thing for filmmaking is good lighting. And this may seem simple, and you may have heard this a dozen times, but if you don't have good lighting, your video will just not look as professional, and overall your film will just not look as good. I'd recommend using either window lighting or getting some cheap softboxes like that one back there. Something like that would be super helpful. But typically for the most natural lighting, you'll want soft lighting at a 45-degree angle. So it shouldn't be direct on, it should be up and pointed down a little bit. Like this, just straight dead on, no shadows. It's not great. It looks like a cringy YouTube video, so I definitely recommend sticking to something like this for your films. Now, if you do want a more cinematic look, typically you want to use harsh lighting. You'll see a lot of people like Marvel and DC use this. They'll use super harsh lighting and backlight it. This is kind of a niche type of lighting, but it does look super cinematic. But if you are trying to go for that look, that's a really easy way to get a cinematic looking video. Backlight it, add some mist, and you look like Marvel. This next thing applies to everyone making videos. Whether it's a YouTube video or it's a filmmaking video, you have to have good audio. Whether that's using a lot of sound effects or that's using quality microphones, you have to have somewhat decent audio. You don't need to spend millions of dollars on microphone equipment, but at least a decent microphone, like a Rode Video Micro or something like that, and you get it closer to your subject's mouth, as close as you can without putting it in frame, and it will give you a much more professional looking video. And again, that applies to people that are just doing YouTube videos too. If you don't have good audio, people aren't gonna like to watch it. So whether that's for filmmaking or for making YouTube videos, make sure you have good audio. I've talked about this before, and many people have as well, but sound effects is key when you're trying to get a cinematic, natural feeling video. So let's say you're making a film and you're, making coffee or something. If there's no sound effects, it's gonna feel kind of weird, it's just not gonna feel natural. The people watching your videos should be able to hear everything that they are seeing. So make sure you're using sound effects that complement what you're doing. If you're making coffee and then you hear a giant whoosh, might not make that much sense in your film. So make sure you're using sound effects, whether you download them or film them yourself. That is key. Now, there is tons of things that I could talk about when it comes to filmmaking. I could talk about gear, and I could talk about composition for hours, and I could talk about a ton of things. But realistically, you just need to know basic. You need to know how to set up your lights, you need to know how to set up your camera, and you need to have good framing. And those are really the keys. Good audio and sound effects. If you have good lighting and you have good composition and you have good settings on your camera, you should have a decent film. Now, if this all doesn't make sense and you're still super confused about like what ISO is or something like that, then I'd recommend watching some more in-depth videos. But this video was really just to give you a quick brush over of really everything you should know in filmmaking. So this might not have been 5 minutes, might have been like 10, I don't even know. But I hope this gave you a nice introduction to filmmaking and should allow you to at least start making some films. So if you want to see more videos like this, then make sure to leave a like on today's video. Also, comment down below if you're going to be making some films soon, and I'll see you in the next one. Alexa, turn on my lamp.
Okay.
Hey.